What would you do if the King of England called security on your film crew, right in front of you, in the middle of a royal estate, while the cameras were still rolling? Because that's exactly what just happened to Meghan Markle. It sounds like fiction, like a scene ripped from the finale of a prestige drama. But this wasn't an episode of The Crown. This was real, witnessed, whispered about, and, depending on who you believe, it was either a moment of royal crisis control or a catastrophic misstep that could upend the future of the monarchy itself. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. 1 minute, the sun was shining over Windsor's ancient grounds. The next, it was pandemonium. A camera was yanked away. A mic was muted. An envelope was handed over. And the king, the actual monarch of the United Kingdom, reportedly uttered 5 words that triggered an emergency security response aimed squarely at Meghan Markle's Netflix production crew. So what in the world just happened? Why was Meghan even there in the first place? And what in that envelope caused Charles to reportedly lose his famously controlled composure? The answers aren't simple. They never are with Meghan, or Charles, or the strange, tangled mess of modern royalty, celebrity, media, and revenge. But what we do know, and what you're about to uncover, is a story that begins not with a formal invitation, but with an unsanctioned arrival. Cameras in tow, lights rolling, and a purpose far more explosive than anyone could have predicted. Let's rewind, because to truly understand what went down during that now infamous encounter, we need to look at the chessboard from both sides. The House of Windsor versus the House of Markle. Tradition versus transformation. Bloodlines versus brand deals. And most importantly, power versus perception. It all started with a whisper, a quiet rumor that Meghan Markle had been granted limited, carefully curated access to certain royal grounds, ostensibly to film some innocuous B-roll footage for a documentary on philanthropy and resilience. The kind of soft-focus content you'd expect from Archwell Productions. Nothing controversial, nothing political. But then, something changed. The crew arrived early. Too early. And they didn't stay in the public-facing gardens where tourists take selfies or where approved media conduct interviews. They moved deeper, past the hedges, past the gates. And then, well, something else moved in too. That's when a senior royal aide reportedly noticed something odd. It wasn't just the camera setup. It was the equipment. Professional-grade boom mics, satellite uplinks, and private security not cleared by palace protocols. Someone counted a crew of nearly 20. Far more than the standard 5-person skeleton team usually approved for royal content. No one could explain why they were there, or what exactly they were filming. That was the first red flag. But then came the second. Meghan wasn't just there to film. She had a mission, and it involved a personal audience with King Charles III. Now let's pause. Ask yourself, who walks onto royal grounds with a camera crew and demands an audience with the sovereign unannounced? This wasn't just a visit. It was a move. And the monarchy? It saw it for what it was. Reports began to swirl behind the scenes that Meghan had brought a letter, handwritten, possibly co-authored by her legal advisors, requesting formal acknowledgement of what she referred to as unfinished obligations from the royal family. What does that mean? In short, money, rights, reparations, recognition. The letter, allegedly, was a bombshell. It referred to unpaid equivalent value for Meghan's time as a working royal. It made references to brand equity, unpaid appearances, lost opportunities, and, here's the kicker, the global commercial value her presence brought to the firm during her short tenure. Have you ever heard of a royal demanding royalties? Neither had Charles. But apparently, Meghan had calculated what she believed was owed, and this wasn't a private matter. Because her Netflix team? They were rolling the whole time. Can you imagine the King of England glancing up from a letter accusing his institution of unpaid influence debts, only to realize he was being filmed? That's when things shifted from surreal to downright chaotic. According to multiple insiders, Charles remained calm for precisely 90 seconds. He read the opening lines. He saw the paragraph that allegedly referenced back pay for royal duties and reputational damages incurred. And then, without finishing the second page, he reportedly signaled to a nearby staffer, who then made a discreet but firm call to royal security. Now let's slow down here. This was no theatrical blow-up. No screaming. No drama. Charles didn't throw the letter. He didn't raise his voice. He simply followed the protocol reserved for high-risk, high-disruption situations. In other words, he pressed the nuclear button. Security was instructed to de-escalate and clear all unauthorized personnel, which included Meghan's Netflix crew, according to palace sources. Not just moved, removed. Can you picture the scene? The king sits back, stony-faced. Meghan, letter in hand, mid-sentence. And behind them, the sound of boots on gravel. Officers in motion. Crew members startled. Equipment being unplugged. Tripods falling over. The Netflix director gesturing wildly. And somewhere, just out of frame, a boom mic still live. Yes, one of the mics was still recording. What it captured, and what happened in the next 5 minutes, has become the stuff of royal urban legend. Leaks, hints, furious PR damage control, and one very strange detail. Someone on Meghan's team tried to scrub the footage, but not before at least one clip got saved. And now, palace insiders are terrified of what's on it. Because here's where things get even murkier. Sources claim Meghan didn't back down. Even as security approached, she stood her ground. According to one stunned aide, she declared, "The world deserves the truth. I won't be silenced again." Dramatic? Absolutely. Scripted? Possibly. But here's the real question. Was she playing to the palace? Or to the camera? Because if this was meant for Netflix, if this was footage for a climactic third-act confrontation in a yet unannounced docuseries, then we may be witnessing one of the boldest media plays in royal history. And Charles knew it, which may explain why, reportedly, he uttered another devastating line before walking away. "Don't film my family like this again. Not while I'm king." Powerful, measured, but also terrifying. Because now, we're in uncharted waters. The monarchy has drawn a line. Meghan has crossed it. And Netflix? They're holding what could be the most explosive royal footage since Diana's infamous Panorama interview. But here's the kicker. This wasn't just about filming. It was about money, legacy, and control. Meghan came with a plan. A letter, a crew, and a message. Charles responded with force, silence, and a security call. So what comes next? Is the footage going to surface? Will Netflix air the confrontation, or has it already triggered legal threats? Did Meghan really believe she could walk back into Windsor, cameras rolling, and rewrite her royal story? Or was that her entire strategy all along? Get ready, because in the chapters to come, we're diving into the full playbook. From the surprise arrival to the security intervention, the audio clip that allegedly survived the purge, and the secret Archwell contract that may have brought everything to a boiling point. This isn't just about one walk-off moment. It's about a war for the royal narrative. And what comes next might be even more explosive than the confrontation itself. What kind of person shows up unannounced at a royal residence with a Netflix crew in tow and expects to be let in? More importantly, what kind of reception were they expecting? It began like any other crisp English morning at Windsor Castle. The scent of damp stone and clipped hedges, the quiet hum of tradition, and a royal staff that, frankly, had seen it all. Or so they thought. But even the most seasoned palace aide hadn't seen this coming. Just after 10 a.m., a sleek black convoy pulled up near one of the side entrances. Not the grand public-facing one where tourists gather, but a more discreet gate used by working royals and approved media on special assignments. The kind of gate that opens only when all the right boxes are ticked. Names submitted. Dates confirmed. Equipment logged. No surprises. Except today, everything was a surprise. The first vehicle was a luxury SUV, glossy and spotless. The second, a nondescript van with covered windows, tinted just a little too dark. Inside, it was packed with lighting rigs, long camera arms, and half a dozen black cases that screamed Hollywood production, not royal visit. And then, the door opened. Out stepped Meghan Markle. No fanfare, no guards, no scheduled escort. Just Meghan. And behind her, a small army of creatives in black jeans, earpieces, baseball caps, and branded lanyards. It wasn't just a visit. It was an operation. One of the security guards on site would later tell a colleague. It felt like a premiere, not a private reunion. But here's the thing. There was no premiere scheduled. No royal calendar event. No formal press coordination. And, most tellingly, no approval from Buckingham Palace for this kind of entry. So why did the gates open? That question would haunt royal insiders for days. Some say Meghan's team used an old contact, a friendly name still inside the palace's media department, who may have believed the crew was part of a pre-cleared documentary project. Others whisper something more troubling, that Meghan's legal team exploited a courtesy clause, a vague, rarely used diplomatic note from years prior that granted limited filming access to certain members of the Royal Foundation for charity content. The clause hadn't been revoked since the Sussexes stepped back. Technically, it wasn't illegal, but it definitely wasn't welcome. Within minutes, Meghan was on the property, walking purposefully toward a lesser-used garden path that curved around the east wing. Her stride was deliberate, not frantic, not secretive, confident. And that's what unsettled people the most. She wasn't hiding what she was doing. She was owning it. One staffer watching from a discreet window reportedly asked out loud, "Is this a setup?" Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. But let's ask the real question. If you were Meghan Markle, and you had one shot to control the royal narrative, wouldn't you bring the cameras? The crew scattered quickly. Two handheld cinematographers positioned themselves near the rose arches. One audio tech clipped a lavalier mic onto Meghan's dress, something pale and designer, yet subtle. She paused only once to adjust a bracelet, the same one she wore during her Oprah interview. And then, she walked forward. There was no announcement, no knock. Just Meghan stepping into the frame, already mid-sentence, already telling a story. Because people assume everything ended when we left. But it didn't. And we're here to show that. That was her first recorded line of the day. Aimed at no one in particular, or at everyone. A narrative was being built. A scene was unfolding. And somewhere, far across the grounds, King Charles was still blissfully unaware that the former Duchess of Sussex was staging a mini-documentary right on his doorstep. But not for long. It was a palace page who saw them first. Barely 16, new to the job. He sprinted down a corridor, panicked, unsure who to tell. Then came the call. Not to Charles directly, but to Sir Edward Young, one of the king's most trusted advisors. The man known for keeping his cool through 3 reigns and more than one royal scandal. Young's reaction? Ice cold. He asked 3 questions. How many crew? Is she mic'd? Is there a live uplink? And then he muttered the words that triggered the internal escalation protocol. This is an integrity breach. At the same time, Meghan was approaching the garden alcove that, incidentally, is often used for informal royal lunches in springtime. It's quiet, private, out of sight. Except this time, she wasn't out of sight. She was in focus. One of the cameramen zoomed in as Meghan stopped, turned to the camera, and said with serene clarity, "I'm not here to make trouble. I'm here to finish what was started." What did she mean by that? Was it a metaphor for her unfinished royal work? Or a statement about the unfinished business between her and the monarchy? The ambiguity was deliberate. It always is. Now let's talk about the crew. This wasn't a ragtag group of freelancers. These were Emmy-nominated documentarians, people who had worked with major streaming platforms, known for stylized verite-style footage, long takes, ambient audio, and emotionally loaded still shots. Everything they filmed was intentional. Every whisper of wind, every glance Meghan gave to the horizon, framed, curated. She knew what she was doing. And it was working, until the birds scattered. That's when they knew something had changed. A strange hush fell over the garden, the kind that precedes impact. And then, footfalls, not rushed, but firm. Heavy boots on ancient gravel. Royal security. 3 of them, uniformed but polite, hands by their sides. No weapons drawn. But their message was unmistakable. "Ma'am, we weren't expecting you." That line, delivered like a question but meant as a command, was the first formal contact between Meghan and the palace since she and Harry's joint appearance at the Queen's funeral nearly 2 years prior. She didn't flinch. Instead, Meghan turned to the nearest camera and said, "This is what transparency looks like." And that's when the mood shifted. The guards weren't trained to deal with film crews. They weren't trained for a royal-turned-Hollywood producer showing up with a legal loophole and a media narrative. So they called it in. And across the estate, Charles was handed a note. It read, "Ms. Markle on grounds. Crew present. Requesting direction." That's when Charles stood up. Not angrily, but with the weary expression of a man who has been tested by scandal after scandal and finally decided that this moment, would be where he drew the line. He gave a simple order. "Escort the crew out. Bring me the letter." No recording. And with that, everything accelerated. The guards radioed back. More officers deployed. A legal aid was summoned, and a palace liaison stepped forward to ask Meghan, politely, firmly, to hand over the footage. She refused. According to multiple witnesses, she said, "This isn't your story anymore. It's mine." Let that sink in. The woman who once stood behind the Queen on the Buckingham balcony was now standing in the Garden of Windsor, telling security officers that the royal family no longer had a right to control the narrative. Somewhere, someone whispered, "This will end in court." But before it got that far, the real drama unfolded. A staffer, likely under pressure, stepped forward and asked Meghan what exactly she was trying to achieve. And her answer? To reclaim the platform. Those 3 words sent a jolt through the crowd. Because that's what this was really about, wasn't it? Not reparations, not even footage, but power, visibility, control of the platform. But just as things reached a breaking point, just as it seemed the confrontation would turn physical, a courier arrived. Meghan turned, reached into her bag, and pulled out a sealed envelope. She handed it to the nearest palace aide and said, "This is for the king." And then she walked away. No wave. No smile. No goodbye. Just Meghan. Back into the car. Back into the waiting van. The convoy pulled out exactly as it had come in. Silent, swift, and surreal. But that envelope? That's what changed everything. Because inside it wasn't just a letter. It was something Charles hadn't seen coming. And what he read in the first 3 lines made him pick up the red phone. Security was no longer optional. The stakes had changed. Because what Meghan wrote wasn't a request. It was a declaration. And what came next would shake the monarchy to its core, and no one saw it coming. What do you call it when a global streaming empire sets up shop on royal grounds without full royal consent? A media ambush? A legal gray zone? Or the most brilliant PR stunt of Meghan Markle's career? Because once the dust settled from her unsanctioned arrival at Windsor, and once the footage of security escorting her team off the estate began circulating in whispered circles around the press, one question rose above the rest. Why was the Netflix crew really there? And how in the world did they get that close? Let's go back to that black van. The one with the tinted windows. The one packed with what looked like standard AV gear, but, as we now know, was anything but standard. A former Netflix producer, who asked not to be named, revealed that the equipment on board wasn't just for recording ambient dialogue or soft focus scenery. They had satellite uplinks, real-time data transfer systems, encrypted footage storage, and, here's the jaw-dropper, live feed capability, capable of broadcasting raw footage back to Los Angeles within seconds. This wasn't just a shoot. This was a mobile command center. Why would Meghan need that? Why would any documentary require that level of infrastructure for a simple charitable visit? Unless it wasn't so simple. And it wasn't just a documentary. Sources close to Netflix's marketing team later revealed that what Meghan's crew was building wasn't just a film. It was a multi-part visual rebranding initiative, something between a prestige documentary and a lifestyle manifesto. Codename? Legacy Reclaimed. Even that title raised eyebrows. But the biggest shock was buried in the crew's paperwork. One of the security guards, reportedly handed a hastily prepared access form. Notice the fine print at the bottom. A clause that read, "Filming subject to goodwill cooperation, pending archival release, and non-obstruction by external governance." Translation? We'll film unless someone physically stops us. And they nearly didn't get stopped. Because for the first 20 minutes of the shoot, no one fully understood what was happening. Meghan and her team had perfected a tactic insiders now call formal ambiguity. Meaning, no one could say for certain whether the crew was allowed to be there, because the paperwork was just vague enough to suggest they were. One palace staffer later said, "By the time we realized what was happening, she already had 3 takes done and a soundbite in the can." And the footage they captured? Not just passive shots. No, Meghan was speaking directly into camera. Passages about identity, about injustice, about unspoken contracts between institutions and the women they silence. She wasn't naming the royal family. Not explicitly, but she didn't have to. The visual of her, standing on royal soil, in front of ivy-draped stone, speaking of systems of suppression, was more powerful than any mention of a name. And Netflix knew it. Because while palace security scrambled to review visitor logs and filming permits, Meghan's team was already uploading the footage, directly, silently, to an external drive reportedly couriered to a legal office off-site. Backup footage, in case the palace tried to block them, in case they were shut down. And then came the moment that changed everything. A palace aide, after realizing the full scope of the shoot, asked to see Meghan's production contract, the document outlining who owned the footage and how it would be used. What they were handed was stunning. The contract wasn't just a Netflix agreement. It was an Archwell intellectual property license. In other words, Meghan wasn't making this documentary for Netflix. She was making it with Archwell as the controlling entity, and then licensing the content to Netflix on her own terms. That meant she wasn't an employee or a hired narrator. She was the owner of the entire production. Let that sink in. The woman once accused of breaking royal protocol by speaking too candidly on camera was now producing, owning, and distributing her own narrative, filmed on royal land, under her terms, with the backing of $1 billion streaming platform. And the palace? Caught flat-footed. They couldn't stop it. Not without a public scandal. Unless they invoked something drastic. And that's exactly what Charles did. He called in a legal strategist known for managing high-profile diplomatic incidents. A man with connections not only in the UK government, but in the international IP law community. Because this wasn't just about trespassing anymore. It was about content rights. If Meghan's footage showed recognizable royal symbols, crests, buildings, even staff uniforms, without permission, the palace could argue that she violated visual licensing agreements. But there was a catch. Meghan's team had blurred every insignia. They'd cropped out any identifying architectural elements. And the camera angles? So tight and controlled that even seasoned royal watchers couldn't identify the exact locations. In short, she beat them at their own game. And yet, there was one vulnerability. Audio. Specifically, the ambient sound of nearby palace staff. Their voices, footsteps, even snippets of overheard conversations. If any of those voices were identifiable and used in the final cut, the palace could push back under privacy laws. But again, Meghan's team was ahead of them. They'd already begun digitally scrubbing the background audio, replacing ambient sound with clean music overlays and generic B-roll. The crew knew they were operating on a knife's edge, and they planned for it. All of this might have stayed behind the scenes. Quiet. Contained. But then, someone leaked a short clip. Just 10 seconds. It showed Meghan walking past a Windsor stone wall, saying, "I never left. I was pushed. And now I've returned to reclaim the narrative." The line went viral. Millions of views. Tens of thousands of shares. Headlines exploded across the globe. And the timing? Impeccable. Because the clip dropped hours before Charles made his public appearance at a Commonwealth luncheon. A moment meant to signal unity, tradition, and strength. Instead, the global news cycle was dominated by that clip. That wall. That walk. And that single, loaded sentence. It wasn't just a content war anymore. It was optics warfare, and Meghan had struck first. But here's where it gets murky. Insiders say the clip was never meant to be public. Not yet. Meghan's team was reportedly blindsided by the leak. Some speculate that a junior editor uploaded the file prematurely. Others believe it was intentional, a shot across the bow to warn the palace. We have the footage. Don't try to bury it. And if that's true, it worked. Because within 48 hours, the palace initiated a quiet but firm series of legal inquiries, not against Meghan directly, but against Netflix's UK distribution arm. They weren't going after the Queen. They were going after the couriers. But Netflix? They stayed silent. No public comment. No press release. Just one subtle update. The Legacy Reclaimed placeholder title began trending internally, not under documentary, but under original event series. That's code. Code for a multi-part, multi-phase release. Think Harry and Meghan, Volume 2. But this time, no Harry. Just Meghan. On the move. On royal land. With a crew. With a message. And if the rumors are true, that footage? It includes not just confrontation, but confrontation with intention. Meghan didn't just come to film. She came to stake a claim. Not in titles. Not in castles. But in public narrative. And that's where things truly turn nuclear. Because as Charles reviewed the final page of the letter she left behind, the part outlining financial considerations for the unauthorized commercial usage of likeness and duty, a detail stopped him cold. A name, buried in the contract. On the last page, the executive producer, a former BBC filmmaker, and a longtime rival of the Royal Press Office. This wasn't random. It was deliberate. And what Meghan planned next, with this team, this footage, and this message, would make the Oprah interview look like a warm-up act. But before she could launch her next strike, one of the boom mics, the one allegedly disabled during the Windsor standoff, had captured something else. A voice. A royal voice. And what that voice said might just flip the narrative all over again. What kind of person hands the King of England an invoice? Not a bill, not a request for a chat, but a calculated, worded, itemized demand. Because that's exactly what insiders claim Meghan Markle did. And when King Charles opened that envelope on the polished oak desk in his Windsor study, what he saw inside stunned even his most seasoned advisors. A letter demanding payment. Royal payment. For what exactly? Time. Presence. Influence. But let's not call it what the tabloids did, a ransom note, a royal shakedown, a reality TV stunt. Let's strip it back and look at what was actually being requested. Because buried in the letter, scrawled in formal language with legal undertones, were 3 specific claims. That Meghan was owed financial compensation for her years as a working royal. That her likeness and reputation had been commercially exploited by the monarchy without consent. That she was seeking an official review of unpaid entitlements relating to security costs, fashion expenditures, and appearance revenues. Let's pause right there, because this was new. No royal, in modern memory, had ever filed a retroactive demand for compensation tied to royal duties. This wasn't a matter of palace payroll or staffing budgets. This was Meghan Markle, a duchess no longer using the title in practice, suggesting that her contributions had created monetary value for the crown and that she now wanted her share. Some reports framed it as reparations, others as a back pay audit. But behind the branding, it was clear. Meghan was putting a price tag on her royal chapter, and it wasn't small. According to leaked estimates, the figure outlined in the letter was somewhere in the range of £32 million, an amount allegedly derived from a blend of public appearance calculations, fashion valuation models, social media engagement metrics, and intellectual property assessments. Yes, Meghan, or rather her legal team, had itemized the commercial impact of her appearances, speeches, and royal engagements. It read more like a brand licensing deal than a letter to her father-in-law. Here's just one line from the alleged document. Based on industry-standard modeling for public-facing figures of equivalent influence, my contributions between 2018 and 2020 generated quantifiable promotional uplift across Commonwealth initiatives and media visibility platforms. Compensation remains outstanding. Read that again. She's essentially saying, I showed up. I smiled. I brought global attention to your brand, and now I want to be paid accordingly. Imagine the Queen reading that. Charles reportedly didn't make it past the second paragraph before putting the letter down and pouring himself a glass of water. Because this wasn't just about money. It was about ownership of narrative. Meghan was reclaiming her place in history. Not as a guest in the royal family, but as a contributor to its global clout. But here's where it gets even messier. The letter wasn't sent through normal channels. It wasn't delivered by the Sussexes' shared counsel or even through a diplomatic intermediary. No, Meghan handed it over personally, while her Netflix team stood just meters away, capturing B-roll footage of her walking the grounds in a soft-focus silhouette. That alone sent shockwaves through the palace. Because it meant this wasn't just a letter, it was a moment. A documented, filmed, symbol-heavy delivery of a financial claim against the British monarchy. One palace insider reportedly muttered, "She's not just breaking the fourth wall, she's setting it on fire." And that wasn't an exaggeration. The optics were devastating. Because to some, this wasn't just a claim for money. It was a public declaration that Meghan believed the monarchy had used her, cashed in on her image, and discarded her when it was politically convenient. And now, she wanted the tab settled. Now let's talk about the numbers, the real numbers. How did she arrive at that £32 million figure? According to royal correspondents who've seen parts of the draft, Meghan's team used a formula that combined estimated global press impressions tied to her royal appearances, the Meghan effect on fashion, which was documented to boost designer sales by 200 to 300% per outing, The value of goodwill and tourism boost from her presence at events like the Royal Tour of Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. Speaking engagement calculations based on celebrity tier keynote rates. Emotional distress damages linked to press hostility, which she allegedly claimed the palace failed to mitigate. To many, this seemed outrageous, unprecedented, even tacky, but others, especially in Hollywood, saw it differently. They saw it as business. As one anonymous talent manager told a U.S. outlet, she was the highest-earning face of the brand, and she got paid nothing. Would you stay silent if Disney used your image on billboards worldwide without paying a dime? That's the battle of perspectives here. To the monarchy, Meghan was family, service, not celebrity. To Meghan, the monarchy was a brand, and she was the brand ambassador who got stiffed. And here's the kicker. Meghan's team apparently made clear in the letter that this wasn't a threat. It was a request for review, with the unspoken suggestion that refusal might lead to disclosure. Disclosure of what? Maybe emails, maybe private texts, maybe unused footage from those final turbulent months in the UK. Maybe footage from the very day she walked the Windsor grounds again. You see where this is going? Charles did too. He knew that if he dismissed the letter outright, Meghan could frame him as dismissive, arrogant, indifferent to the real cost she bore while wearing the crown, even for a short time. But if he entertained the letter, he legitimized it. He set a precedent that future royals, disgruntled, deposed, or defiant, could point to when demanding payment for duty. It was a trap, and Charles was walking straight toward it. But he had one card left to play: the sovereign grant agreement. Buried deep in the legal framework of royal finances is a clause that limits the ability of working royals to claim individual monetary rights from collective public-funded activities. In other words, if you serve, you serve. If you leave the money behind. Meghan knew this, but her counterargument? She claimed that she wasn't compensated at the level equal to the impact she had, and that her departure only occurred after she realized the institution would never treat her contributions as equal to Kate's, or Camilla's, or even Anne's. And she had numbers to prove it. Charts, graphs, sales data. It wasn't emotional. It was forensic. She wasn't pleading. She was presenting a case. And that's what made Charles truly uneasy. Because even if he disagreed with the premise, he knew she had receipts. So he brought in the only advisor who could help. A former Treasury official turned royal accountant. The man's job? To dissect the claim line by line and determine whether any of Meghan's financial points could trigger a legitimate reputational or legal liability. The result? A confidential report now locked in a secure file. But sources say the conclusion was chilling. While not legally enforceable, the claim represents a significant reputational risk to the sovereign. Public perception may interpret refusal as institutional exploitation of a woman of color during a historic transition period. Translation: you may win the legal battle, but lose the war of public opinion. And that, more than anything, terrified the palace. Because they'd seen what happened after Oprah. They'd seen the polls shift, the interviews multiply, the sympathy surge, and now, with Meghan once again shaping her own story. But this time armed with footage, contracts, and financial analysis, the stakes were sky-high. But as Charles wrestled with his options, someone else entered the picture: Prince William. And what William demanded would threaten to split the family and the firm in half. What does it take to make a monarch lose his composure? Not a scandal, not the press, not even a rebellious son, but a former duchess, holding a legal document in one hand and walking across royal property with a camera crew in the other? That did it. Because when King Charles III issued the security command that morning at Windsor, it wasn't just a protocol call. It was a reckoning. The moment the carefully managed image of a modern monarch cracked. And the man behind the crown finally let something slip. And the words he allegedly said? "This ends now. Let's rewind." Charles had just finished a series of briefings. It was supposed to be a quiet day. Low visibility, tight schedule, routine engagements. Nothing disruptive. Certainly nothing that required press handling. Then came the knock. An envelope. Sealed. Hand-delivered. No official courier. No diplomatic stamp. And the name on the back? Markle. The aide who handed it over tried to downplay the delivery. Said it came with her regards, and that there's a crew filming outside the East Garden. Outside, filming, Charles blinked. He asked a single, devastating question. Who approved this? Silence. Because no one had. The room froze. A second aide stepped in, whispering, just barely, that Ms. Markle had arrived with a Netflix production unit, escorted through a lesser-used gate under an outdated courtesy clause. Charles didn't speak. He simply opened the envelope. 3 lines in, and he pushed back from the desk. This was not a family letter. This was a business demand. Formal, structured, unapologetic. The sort of thing you don't write to your father-in-law. The sort of thing you serve across a courtroom table. And then, he reached for the red phone. Only used in rare circumstances. Not emergencies in the traditional sense. No medical issues. No threats to national security. But the internal code red used when royal protocol is being breached in real time. The message? Situation active. Clear unauthorized personnel. Secure perimeter. Silent exit. Translation: escort them out, quietly but firmly. Shut it down. Don't make it worse. But this time, it was already too late. Because by the time the order reached the garden, Meghan was no longer walking. She was speaking, facing a camera. Mic clipped, voice calm, and she was delivering a monologue. According to one witness, the statement included references to broken promises, institutional silence, and the phrase, "I returned here in peace, but I won't leave in silence." That footage, now under intense legal scrutiny, was being shot at the exact moment Charles issued the call. And then, something else happened. An aide interrupted the king, a rare breach in itself, with a live audio feed captured from a crew member's boom mic still open via wireless channel. The feed? It had caught Charles's name. Not shouted, not insulted, just mentioned. Context unknown. But it was enough. Because at that moment, the king, usually composed, trained for crisis, said something he hasn't said in public in decades. Get her out. For words. Not yelled, but firm. Unmistakable. And that was when the true machinery of royal protection kicked in. For black cars rolled up. Not the usual royal convoy. These were tactical response vehicles, typically reserved for terrorism-level threats or high-risk evacuations. The crew didn't know what hit them. First, the camera operators were approached and asked to power down. One resisted, citing editorial freedom and claiming they were filming under protected civil documentation rights. Wrong argument. The second crew member, a producer, tried to explain that the footage was for internal use only, pending approval from Netflix's editorial board. Wrong again. Because from the palace's view, this wasn't a documentary anymore. It was a breach. A trespass. Intellectual, emotional, and symbolic. The former Duchess of Sussex had walked into the heart of the monarchy, pointed a camera at herself, and delivered what was, in essence, a public challenge. And Charles? He wasn't playing defense anymore. He was drawing a line. The king stepped out of his study moments later. He didn't make a statement. He didn't greet the press. But according to multiple sources, he paused at a window overlooking the garden and watched as the first cameras were loaded into vans. One aide asked if he'd like to issue a formal cease and desist. Charles replied, "She knows what she's doing. This is the last time." What did that mean? Was it a personal vow, or a signal that the gloves were off? Because from that moment forward, the palace activated Project Iron Ring, an internal damage control strategy originally designed to deal with unauthorized drones, hidden recorders, and leaked royal documents. It had never been used for a family member. Until now. But here's the twist. The crew? They weren't rattled. Not really. Because several members of Meghan's team had already left the estate grounds. Quietly, carrying storage drives and footage, headed back towards central London via side roads. Meaning, the footage was safe. At least from their perspective. But inside the palace? It was war mode. Charles convened an emergency closed-door meeting with 2 senior legal advisors, the head of communications, and, surprisingly, Camilla. Why Camilla? Because she's the only other person alive who's lived through a comparable media storm. The Diana years. The tabloids. The public rejection. She knows what a PR ambush looks like. And her verdict? She's positioning herself as the victim again. And this time, you're the villain. Charles didn't disagree. But then, something shifted in the conversation. Camilla, after glancing through the copy of Meghan's letter, reportedly asked, "What if she releases it all?" The room went quiet. because that's when the gravity of the situation fully landed. This wasn't just a stunt. It was the opening move of a new campaign. A post-royal, ultra-produced, globally distributed counter-narrative to everything the palace had been trying to repair since the Oprah sit-down. And this time, there was no Harry buffer, no joint statements, no awkward reconciliations. This was Meghan, alone, filming herself on royal soil, speaking directly to the world. And Charles? He was on the back foot, but not for long, because the palace had one last play, a digital surveillance request. Through back-channel legal maneuvering, the palace reportedly filed a confidential request for temporary geofencing of any footage tagged within Windsor coordinates, an attempt to limit the viral spread of any unreleased Meghan footage. A legal long shot. Yes, but symbolic, because it sent a message. You filmed on our land. You think you own the story, but this is still the Crown's domain. The problem? Netflix had already encrypted the footage off-site. The Crown was chasing shadows. But there was one thing the palace still had. The audio file. Yes, the infamous boom mic. The one left running during the confrontation. The one no one noticed. And that mic? It picked up more than just ambient noise. It picked up a whispered conversation between two crew members, one of whom reportedly muttered, "If we cut this right, it's the new Diana tape." Read that again. The new Diana tape. That's not just ambition. That's intention. Which is why, when Charles heard that line played back, raw, unedited, captured during what was supposed to be a private exchange, he didn't speak. He simply stood and gave his final order. Lock it down. If she wants a war, we'll give her silence. But what no one knew yet was that Meghan had already prepared for that silence. Because the next move wasn't his to make. It was William's. And the phone call he made, just 30 minutes after security removed Meghan's crew, would shake the monarchy from the inside out. What happens when the camera shuts off, but the mic keeps rolling? When the shouting ends, but a single device quietly captures everything. Because while the world fixated on the footage of Meghan being escorted off royal grounds, while headlines screamed about her envelope, her crew, and Charles's fury, something else was happening behind the scenes. Something far more dangerous. One boom mic, allegedly forgotten in the chaos, had been left hot, live, still recording long after the confrontation between Meghan Markle and Windsor security had ended. And what it picked up wasn't just technical chatter. It was voices. Raw, real, unguarded voices. The kind the palace never wants the world to hear. Let's start with the basics. A senior audio technician on Meghan's crew, known for his work on high-profile Netflix documentaries, had been using a high-sensitivity directional boom mic, mounted on a shoulder rig and linked wirelessly to an encrypted sound recorder tucked into his jacket. Standard procedure. Except when the palace called for shutdown, only the external cameras were targeted. Why? Because security assumed once the lights went dark, the show was over. It wasn't. That boom mic remained hot for another 12 minutes. And those 12 minutes may end up being the most explosive audio leak in modern royal history. Because just after Meghan handed over the envelope, just after Charles issued his command, just as security began clearing the crew from the estate, the microphone picked up a flurry of whispered conversations. Most notably, a side exchange between two production team members, one female producer, one male camera operator, discussing what they'd just captured. And their words? Chilling. He looked panicked. One says, "Yeah." The other replies, "He knows this is bigger than him now. We got it. What about the mic? It's still rolling. Everything. Even this." And then, there's a pause. A long, eerie silence, followed by what can only be described as a third voice, slightly farther off mic, but unmistakably British, deep, composed, and full of tension. A palace insider? A royal staffer? Or, as some now claim, Charles himself? Here's what was allegedly said, as transcribed by an anonymous studio editor who later leaked the tape to a London tabloid. This is blackmail. Dressed in makeup and media, but still blackmail. Let that land. If true, it would be the first time the monarch has been heard, outside of official state recordings, referring to Meghan's actions in such pointed, deliberate language. And it didn't stop there. More rustling. Footsteps. Then another whispered exchange. "Do we have her mic?" "It's gone. Taken before they moved her. So it's just us." Just us, and whatever she smuggled out in that bag. There it was. Confirmation, caught live, that Meghan may have taken more than just footage from her impromptu visit. Documents? Recordings? Proof? Or perhaps even a second letter, one not meant for Charles, but for the press. And as the audio continues, a stunning phrase cuts through the static. She planned this. Every second of it. And now we have to respond. Carefully, quietly, permanently. Permanently. What does that mean? Damage control? Legal lockdown? Or something more strategic? A full-scale media freeze-out designed to suffocate Meghan's narrative before it finds oxygen? Whatever the intent, that one word, permanently, was enough to send alarm bells through media circles when the audio first leaked online. Because within minutes of its appearance, the clip was ripped down from every major platform. Twitter, YouTube, Reddit, even encrypted forums and cloud links. Gone. Vanished. Scrubbed under a DMCA notice filed, not by Netflix, but by a third-party UK legal firm with connections to the royal estate. They were trying to bury it, but it was too late. A few journalists had already heard it. One, a former BBC royal correspondent, took to social media to write, "If the clip I just heard is real, we're not in a PR war anymore. We're in constitutional quicksand." Because here's where the leak truly bites. It didn't just capture whispers. It captured intent. It captured a monarchy reeling and reacting. And it captured Meghan's crew, not shaken, but confident, almost emboldened. At one point in the audio, the producer is heard saying, "This is going to win us an Emmy. Not maybe, not if. This is going to win us an Emmy." That level of certainty? That's not accidental. That's not opportunistic. That's strategic. And suddenly, the palace realized something chilling. They weren't being filmed. They were being documented. This wasn't about catching a moment. It was about creating one. And Meghan? She wasn't just the star of that moment. She was the architect. But here's the part that really sent the palace scrambling. Just before the clip ends, the boom mic picks up a male voice, one some now believe belongs to Prince William's private secretary, saying, "If this gets out, we lose control. He'll lose control." He, presumably being Charles. And right there, right at the end, the producer mutters, "Too late, too late," 2 words. And they've become a rallying cry. Because once the audio leaked, even in fragments, royal watchers knew the game had changed. The story was no longer about whether Meghan's arrival at Windsor was appropriate. It was about why she did it, about what she captured, and about how the monarchy chose to respond. Because if the king really called her actions blackmail, even in frustration, that's not just a personal reaction. That's a legal position. That opens doors and consequences, which is why, in the days that followed, the palace issued a rare, cryptic statement. "We are aware of the recent circulation of unauthorized audio recordings purporting to capture internal estate matters. We caution the public against accepting any unverified material as representative of the Crown's official position." Translation? We're not denying it, but we're not confirming it either. And that gray area? It's where Meghan thrives. Because suddenly, she doesn't need to release the footage. She doesn't even need to speak. The leak did it for her. And now, public perception is shifting again. Was she trespassing or testifying? Was the mic a mistake or a message? And if it was a message, who was it meant for? The palace? The public? Harry? Or all of them at once? Because now, the conversation has turned. From protocol to power. From tradition to transparency. And the king? He may have the crown, but Meghan has the mic. And what she does next, with the footage, with the audio, with the story, could either reignite sympathy or shatter credibility. But there's one voice we haven't heard yet. One person who stayed silent through all of it. Prince William. And the phone call he made after hearing that audio might be the real bombshell. Because it wasn't just emotional. It was strategic. And what he said on that call could change the line of succession forever. What do you get when 1,000 years of monarchy smashes into the glittering machinery of modern streaming culture? You get chaos. You get spectacle. You get boom mics in the rose gardens of Windsor and drone shots circling over centuries of decorum. You get exactly what happened when Meghan Markle brought reality television to the royal gates and walked directly into a storm of scandal, protocol violations, and historic embarrassment. But let's be clear, this wasn't just an unscripted moment. It was a collision course. Because everything the royal family stands for, silence, tradition, hierarchy, exists in direct opposition to the logic of reality TV. And Meghan? She understands both worlds. She didn't just cross the line. She played both sides of it. And she knew exactly where to aim. Here's the contradiction at the heart of it all. Royals aren't supposed to be relatable. They're supposed to be above the fray. Elevated. A symbol. They don't complain. They don't explain. They endure. But reality TV? It thrives on the mess. It feeds on conflict. Tears. Betrayals. Walk-offs. Microphones catching conversations that weren't meant to be heard. So what happens when a woman who starred on Suits, married into monarchy, and walked away with a Netflix deal decides to blur the line between institution and entertainment? You get the Windsor incident. Let's paint the picture again. Security guards trained in emergency evacuation drills suddenly confronting film producers trying to get another angle. Palace aides whispering about schedules while a lighting technician asks, "Can we shoot B-roll of the tea trays?" And Meghan, poised, polished, standing near the Queen Mother's garden fountain, giving a monologue about silence, struggle, and transformation, while a cameraman crouches just out of frame. To royal protocol, it was a violation. To reality television, it was gold. But to truly understand how worlds collided that day, we need to break down what went wrong and why it matters. First, protocol. Royal visits follow an ironclad structure. Nothing is spontaneous. Every meeting, every walkabout, every photo op, planned to the second. There are rules about where you can stand, how long you can stay, and who speaks first. Filming inside the walls of royal property? That requires signed approvals from multiple departments, review of scripts, security vetting of every crew member, and strict guidelines about what can be shown. Even BBC crews doing official documentaries are monitored by palace liaisons. But Meghan? She skipped the process. Sources confirm that no filming permission was granted by the palace for that day. No formal clearance. No security list. No press liaison present. Which means her shoot violated at least 6 standard rules of royal engagement. That's not a mistake. That's a decision. And here's where the reality TV engine kicked in. Because Meghan wasn't playing by royal rules. She was playing by Hollywood's. In that world, you don't ask for access. You grab it before the door closes. You don't wait for permission. You get the shot and deal with the fallout later. And that's exactly what her Netflix team did. They moved fast. Set up 3 cameras. Pulled focus on ancient windows, mossy stone, and Meghan framed in sunlight. Everything designed to feel intimate, authentic, emotional, but behind it, calculation. Because nothing about reality TV is truly real. It's constructed, it's sculpted, and what Meghan created on that day wasn't just footage. It was content. Now let's talk about the symbolism, because here's where the impact lands. The monarchy wasn't just disrupted by cameras. It was challenged by a new kind of storytelling. In the royal tradition, control is everything. The crown speaks when it chooses, releases photos on its own timeline, narrates history through carefully curated events. But reality TV? It explodes that control. It captures what's not supposed to be seen. It gives power to the subject, not the system. And Meghan? She didn't just turn the camera on herself. She turned it on the institution. Every carefully arranged flower bed in her shot, every weathered stone path she walked, every staffer caught in the background, all of it became part of the narrative. Her narrative, not as a disgraced royal, but as a woman reclaiming her voice. And here's the twist. Most of the public, especially outside the UK, loved it. In Los Angeles, she trended within minutes. In New York, talk shows dissected her outfit, her delivery, her tone. In Sydney, hashtags exploded. Hashtag Windsor walk off. Hashtag reclaiming legacy. Hashtag the other crown. Because while the British press foamed at the mouth over security breaches and monarchical betrayal, global audiences, raised on Kardashians, Oprah confessions, and prestige Netflix sagas, saw something else. An icon in the making. Someone who took on the firm again. And this time, with the receipts rolling on 4K. Now ask yourself, was it reckless? Was it disrespectful? Or was it genius? Because whether you love her or loathe her, Meghan did something no one else has ever done. She treated the royal family like a storyline. And not just any storyline. A high-stakes, emotionally charged, slow-burning drama with cliffhangers, villains, underdogs, and big reveals. She saw what the monarchy tried to suppress and made it her brand. But this is where the danger begins. Because the royal family isn't just a cast of characters. It's an institution. It represents nations. And when someone reframes it as entertainment, the consequences echo across more than just TikTok. Diplomatic ties, press relations, public trust, and most damning of all, succession optics. Because if the world sees the monarchy as reality TV, what happens to its sacredness? To its authority? To its future? And maybe that's the point. Because Meghan's reality camera wasn't just aimed at herself. It was aimed at the system. And Charles, he felt it. That's why he called security. Not because of one boom mic, but because he saw the truth. She wasn't just filming a scene. She was writing history. And in her version of history, she's not the exile. She's the protagonist. The palace? Just a stage. And the royal family? Unwilling castmates in a global narrative they can't control. So now the crown is scrambling to pull the curtain back down. Lawyers, statements, silences. But it might be too late. Because the footage exists. The audio exists. And the world already saw the trailer. But what comes next is the showdown they never prepared for. Because William? He's not waiting anymore. And his next move? It won't be quiet. 2 words. That's all it reportedly took to send a chill through Buckingham Palace. And those 2 words came not from a palace aide, not from a press secretary, but from the man who will one day sit on the throne. Prince William, the heir, the eldest, the one who has spent his entire life preparing for duty, not drama. But that morning, after news reached him that Meghan Markle had walked onto royal grounds with a Netflix crew, confronted the king, and left a letter that was more like a lawsuit, something inside William snapped. He picked up the phone, dialed directly into Windsor, and when Charles answered, the only thing William said at first was this: "She's back." Not what happened. Not is this true. Not how bad is it. Just, she's back. Because in William's mind, and in the minds of many royal insiders, Meghan's appearance wasn't just an awkward breach. It was a declaration of war. And this time, she hadn't brought Harry. She hadn't asked permission. She had simply arrived, flanked by cameras and contracts, as if to say, I don't need your titles. I don't need your protection. I am the story now. And for William, the man who watched the monarchy twist itself into knots trying to preserve unity during Megxit, who sat through interviews, awkward family summits, press scrums, and funeral photo ops. This was a betrayal too far. So when he spoke to Charles that morning, aides described his voice as controlled rage. No shouting, no pleading, just cold precision. He reportedly told his father, "You let her walk in. You let her film. And now she's 2 steps ahead, again." But Charles pushed back. He reminded William that no formal invitation had been issued, that the security team had acted fast, that the footage was already being contained. But William didn't buy it. He wasn't interested in containment. He wanted consequences. And the most shocking part of the call, he threatened to walk away. Not from the family, from future royal events. Let that sink in. Prince William, the future king, allegedly told Charles that unless something was done, unless the palace took a public stand against Meghan's ambush and her weaponization of Windsor, he would pull out of upcoming engagements. Not just in protest, but to protect himself. Because William's biggest fear? That he would be blindsided on camera. That one day, walking into a charity gala or school visit, a Netflix producer would appear in the crowd. That a Rode boom mic would hover just out of view. That a quote would be taken out of context and stitched into another Meghan Markle docuseries without his knowledge. He wasn't afraid of confrontation. He was afraid of manipulation. And after hearing about the leaked audio, the one where someone allegedly compared Meghan's new project to the next Diana tape, William reportedly said to Charles, "She's not just attacking the institution. She's rewriting the history before we get a chance to." And in that moment, a new reality became clear. The war between Meghan and the monarchy wasn't about geography anymore. It wasn't about stepping back from duties. It was about narrative power, control of the story, and the Windsors were losing. Because while they released carefully curated family photos, Meghan was releasing unfiltered confessions. While they hosted charity balls, she was dropping viral clips. While they played defense, she played Netflix. And William had had enough. According to palace sources, he made 3 key demands during that phone call. Issue a public clarification, denying Meghan had any right to film on royal property. Pursue legal options to block use of the footage, including cease and desist letters to Archewell's UK partners. Review access rules to ensure Meghan or anyone affiliated with her production team would not be allowed on any royal estate without explicit, written permission, not even as a guest of family. Charles, ever the peacemaker, hesitated. He wanted diplomacy.